It's time to take away the Nobel Prize from Paul Samuelson. Oh my goodness, how dare you, Josh? You're just a guy in his t-shirt, hasn't shaved with his dogs. How dare you come after the father of modern economics, Paul Samuelson? Yeah, it's about time we acknowledge this. Clown world persists because of people like Paul Samuelson. There's no other way around that. All right, so let's just start with a brief quote from my man Thomas Sowell. And I just 100% could not agree more with Thomas Sowell, because Thomas Sowell kicks ass. You know, he's still alive, but he's, his last legs here. So God bless you, Thomas Sowell, because you and Walter Williams, man, you had more. Rustici, his white guy, Italian guy, who I was one of my professors. Never took a class with Walter Williams. I never met Thomas Sowell. I met Walter Williams, met Clarence Thomas through Walter Williams at George Mason. Thomas Rustici was my guy. Carrie Meyer was, she's not an Austrian economics by any stretch, but she was another professor, had a big influence on me at George Mason. Big fan of Carrie. She's not right wing by any stretch of the imagination, but I very much enjoyed her classes. There's another guy I'm dropping a blank on. The problem with George Mason, though, I'll tell you real quick, is they were hiring all these Chinese guys and they couldn't speak the language. I mean, they could try, but no one could understand the thing they were saying. I was like, why are we doing this? Cheap labor? It's nuts. I'll never forget this. He's like, I can't understand. They're brilliant people, I'm sure, but if we couldn't understand them, I can't speak Mandarin. I can't speak Cantonese. You know what I'm saying? It's crazy. I was like, why am I paying for this tuition? No one can understand what these people are saying. It's nuts. Anyway, so here's Thomas Sowell. This is Sowell on math and economics. Introductory economics is too often taught as if students in it were all potential economists who had to be introduced to standard graphs, equations, and jargon that they will need in higher level courses for that profession. With all the time that is devoted to equipping these students with tools they will never use again, some may leave an introductory economics course with little more understanding of real-world economic issues than they would if they never taken the course to begin with. 100%. Oh, and here's an appreciation of Paul Samuelson, the pivotal figure in the movement towards mathematics and economics. So why did we do Actually, let me just cut to the chase. So here's the father of modern economics, Paul Samuelson. Now remember, this is the guy who in 1989 predicted the Soviet Union's economy would overtake that of the U.S. He predicted that, and literally a couple months later, kaboom, kaboom, kaplunk. Anyway, so called the father of modern economics, Samuelson became the first American to win the Nobel Prize in 1970 for his work to transform the fundamental nature of the discipline. He insisted that mathematics was essential, and his numerous and groundbreaking contributions provide the foundation for modern economics is built. His textbook, Economics: An Introductory Analysis, is one of the most widely used in the history of American education. So we go back here. Why is there so much economic illiteracy? Paul Krugman is one. All right. Stanford economist Thomas Sowell was asked the other day whether the understanding of basic economics has been elevated in political discussions over time. Economic literacy hasn't gotten better, it's gotten worse. At one time, you had a lot of people who hadn't had any economics training saying foolish things. Now you have well-known economists saying foolish things. Although he didn't name names, New York Times columnist Paul Krugman must rank high in the list of guilty parties. There was a time that Paul Krugman said a zero minimum wage was the way to go, because a minimum wage wasn't just restrictive on employers, it was restricted on employees as well. All right, and where did all this come from? So we're going to go here, and we're going to start with my man. This freaking article is, I don't even know who this dude is. An Analytical Aspects of Anti-Inflationary Policy by Johannes Mengesha, a PhD fellow at that place, Maya University. A macroeconomic keynote, the Samuelson-Solow Phillips curve of the Great Inflation. All right, so this is where it all started to go downhill. Remember, the economics department has always had math. It's actually called physics envy. All right, so physicists after Einstein, purportedly showed that the space-time. Do I need to get into this? No, I'm not going to do it here. All right, so we know Einstein's a plagiarist. We know that for a fact. That's not even debatable anymore. People say, "Oh no, he's not." No, well, I mean a little bit, but no, he gave Poincaré, credits. I'm debating this guy on I was like, these guys don't know what they're talking. Literally, they don't. They've been fed the pornography of the modern world so heavily that they just can't break free from it. It's like they can't break free. 1905 special relativity did not cite friggin' Poincaré. Now, actually, by the way, where did Einstein probably get his basis from? From his wife, who he left to frickin' fry, essentially, because Einstein was a scumbag who went to live with his. Don't forget, Einstein was writing in 1905 while he was a frickin' the Swiss Patent Office, just a clerk at the Swiss Patent Office. He was writing in the most prestigious scientific journals of the time as he was a clerk. No one knew what Einstein was. He couldn't get a job as professor. It's such a scam. Anyway, so along comes Eddington experiment to prove the bending of space-time continuum. The whole thing's stupid. You know, I'm still wondering what happened to Cavendish, what happened to mass attracts mass, and stuff. Anyway, but that just took off. Eddington has some serious holes in it, but it didn't matter. The Royal Academy of Sciences in Britain took over, and the rest is histoire. Then we even have battle or aircraft carriers saying, lining up their airplanes saying E equals mc squared, as if Einstein is the E, as if relativity had anything to do with nuclear power. The whole thing is just freaking stupid. But here we are. We are literally living in stupidity in our world today. All right, so then they say, well, we got to give credence to Einstein because we have nuclear power, thus Einsteinian freaking relativity. No, it has nothing to do with it, but let's just keep going. So all this money was given towards the physicists of the 1940s and 50s because of nuclear power, and people say, well, that's the way to go. And economists are sitting there like, oh, I want a piece of that pie. But like everyone's like, but you're soft science. You're like psychology. But no, we're not a soft science. We're mathematicians. Then we had freaking Markowitz, Francis Modigliani, whatever the hell the guy's name was, who started putting numbers together with their economics. They said, look, it's kind of like Einstein putting numbers together to prove gravity. Like, you can put numbers together all day long. It doesn't prove crap. You know what I'm saying? And so what happened was we had all these people now starting to put mathematics into economics to prove econometrics. The economics was a real science. Because look at all these numbers. It's freaking idiotic. It still to this day pisses me off. Because it drove a lot of people like me, who I still was able to get over it because I like the philosophy of economics, the micro. But like my daughter Chloe at UGA right now, she's like, dude, macroeconomics is the stupidest thing since sliced bread. I said, I know, girl, I know it's dumb. But if you want to get if you want a career in economics, you got to look at least give to Caesar what Caesar's, and acknowledging that macroeconomics, while it's stupid, is still the only game in town, man. And she's not going to do that because she's like, this is dumb. I mean, literally, we're making stuff up to try to perpetuate this lie of macroeconomics. So here comes Paul Samuelson. We're going to put math to the thing. And what happened was, and so he won his Nobel Prize in 1970. But what happened before that? So let's go down here. This is freaking fast. I'm not sure I can link to it because it looks like I downloaded it. All right, so we'll get into it right here. We're going to go down to right here. 1 second. So the Samuelson-Solow Phillips curve provided the economic rationale for expansionary government policies in the 1960s. It's the Phillips curve. The Phillips curve was a freaking lie. The guy who invented the Phillips curve, Mr. Phillips, I don't know his first name off the top of my head. He did not. Anyway, so they expanded the Phillips curve from what this guy did in the UK, and they looked over 25 years of histoire, and they just basically said, we're going to make the numbers work. They'll plead to anything if we torture them enough. And so now we got the expansionary government policy of the 1960s, and it played an important role in the great inflation that occurred in the 1960s and 70s. The great inflation, what caused that? Would it be the price of petroleum? Yes, but we're going to deal with that by expansionary government. We're going to deal with inflation because the price of petroleum by expanding the government to get people to work. Yes, because full employment, the Phillips curve says the more inflation, the more people work, and we'll trade off high inflation with high employment. Really? Okay, is that simple? Yeah, no, it is, Josh. It works that way. The interesting historical question, however, is would economic events, i.e. world events, during the 1960s and 70s turn out differently if Samuelson and Solow had not weighed in with their Phillips curve? Some events say the events are likely to turn out the same, but others, like Milton Friedman, believe that the event might have turned out differently had they not weighed in. All right, so let's keep going. So what was the problems So here's Milton Friedman criticizing the Phillips curve, which we all economic, because it allowed the government to spend, and it gave them an economic basis for spending. If we spend, we will freaking create low employment, or low unemployment, I should say. Even though we might have some inflation, but we can create low unemployment. Milton Friedman presented the flaws with the logic. The exclusion of inflationary expectations from the Phillips curve effectively assumes the curve effectively assumes one unchanging expected rate of inflation. He argued that the Phillips curve trade-off gave too much of a role to monetary policy, and by assigning to monetary policy a larger role than it conformed. The Fed. That's what's happening now. Freaking Jerome Powell speaks yesterday. Oh my goodness! And then suddenly we got massive employment gains, 500,000, that no one expected. Jerome Powell just spoke the day before, and no one expected that. Because the Fed control. Actually, all practicing macroeconomists, oh great, now accept Friedman's critique of the original Phillips curve. So let's go back to what was some of the critiques of the original Phillips curve. It's out the Phillips curve, from which freaking Samuelson won his Nobel Prize, and the whole economics profession just became insanely stupid, as Thomas Sowell just said, regarding Paul Krugman and all these others, because all it did was advocate for expansionary government. It was neither statistical nor structural. Samuelson and Sowell provided no empirical estimates of the Phillips curve. Others celebrated 1960 paper, for which we're still living under the freaking jackboot. Instead, they simply hand drew a line they believe fit the data for the 25-year period. Don't forget the 25-year period from 1934 to 1958 included World War II and the Great Depression. As it turns out, the estimated Phillips curve bears small resemblance to their hand-drawn curve. Moreover, regarding the policy recommendations of Samuelson, the estimated Phillips curve provides little support for the menu of lower unemployment, higher inflation trade-offs. The majority of economics professionals were so quick to buy their policy prescriptions, though, when many surely knew that the curve which from those prescriptions were derived was not based on a regression analysis. One has to wonder if the path of macroeconomic policy in the United States during the 60s and 70s might have evolved differently if they had actually statistically estimated the curve. Right. In the 1970s, many industrial countries experienced high levels of both inflation and unemployment, which is what exactly the Phillips curve said could not happen. Economists created a new word called stagflation. This is why we got to get rid of Paul Samuelson's Nobel Prize. The fact of stagflation clearly disapproved the theory of the Phillips curve. Since then, many famous economists criticized the curve. Yep, they argued people could understand adjusted purchasing power and the power of money wages. All right. Therefore, higher inflation would not lead to lower unemployment in the long run. 100%. It's so freaking stupid. The curve was met with great political and popular appeal. Alan Metzler argues that it was in this great political popular appeal to the Phillips curve that caused the inflationary policies of the 70s to persist. The great inflation resulted from many policy choices because of false data that Samuelson used. He used it incorrectly, and yet he allowed it to be kind of almost like freaking the Eddington experiment. All right, so here we got Hall and Hart argued that Samuelson and Sowell never estimated their Phillips curve, but instead hand drew it to fit the data. And these guys use modern econometric technique to re-estimate the data of Samuelson and Sowell. The result from the re-estimation is quite different from what they hand-drew result. In fact, they point out in a very high unemployment economy with rates of 10% unemployment, raising inflation does lower unemployment and it lowers it a great deal. But contrast unemployment in the 5 to 6% range. Basically, we have actually an increase in inflation because of the Phillips curve if we start massive government expenditures. Thus, while reduction in employment from 5.5% to a full employment of 4%, that's what we used to call full employment, having 4% unemployed. Anyway, so I want to look at this. So here's this article right here. How much time? Okay, right here. Miami School. This is Thomas Hall and William Hart objecting to a criticism they had of their paper. We appreciate the time, energy, and space that Hoover, that's the guy who criticized these guys, has devoted to our paper. While we find his discussion interesting, much of it has little bearing on what we sought to accomplish. we sought to accomplish in 2012 was not the nuance of the context that motivated Samuelson or about debating just how critical the curve was to policymakers. It was surely important. Our primary objective in 2012 was far less ambitious or subjective. It was, quite simply, to answer one question. Using straightforward econometric estimation techniques available at that time, could Samuelson and Solow have produced the 1959 to 1960 Phillips curve they claim fit the data over the last 25 years? We're going to torture the data to make it say uncle. And they won a Nobel Prize for that. Our answer was a resounding no. We were not interested in replacing the Great Depression World War II data with fictional normal years before estimating the Phillips curve, which is what Samuelson did. We were not interested in finding point C and estimating a post-war Phillips curve with a three data point post-war sample using a restricted estimation technique. And as originally written, our paper was most definitely not about whether the estimation period for the Phillips curve should be 25 years, as Samuelson claims, or whether it should be the post-war period, as Hoover claimed. Samuelson claimed as 25 years. They lied, and people died. 100%. Our sole motivation was empirically to let the data, all 25 years, speak for itself. And it doesn't. It's fabrication. Just like special relativity. Fabrication. You can believe it or not, I don't care. I hear all these people in my business. The Nobel Prize with a Robert Schiller. Nobel Prize, Paul Krugman. I don't give two craps about that crap, dude. You're not going to win a Nobel Prize if you're not in the in crowd. Stop looking at Nobel laureates as all that in a bag of chips. It's like looking at the Pope. The Pope is just elected from other cardinals within the Catholic Church. He's not freaking God's chosen. It's silly. All these people knew, for instance, that there are massive amounts of pedo crap going on in the Catholic Church. These same people voted for the Pope. But the Pope is God's chosen because pedos, or they might not be pedos themselves, but people certainly knew about pedo were going on in their domain. They were representing God. This is God's vicar? You crazy? Just because these Nobel laureates are, they got a Nobel Prize. That's the establishment. And so until the Nobel Prize takes away Paul Samuelson's Nobel Prize, it ain't crap to me. And it shouldn't be crap to you either. Love your thoughts. We'll see you.